You've been lied to about emotions. Society has convinced you that caring deeply about everything, feeling everything intensely, and staying emotionally invested in every outcome is what makes you human. They've told you that emotional detachment means becoming cold, heartless, and disconnected from the world around you. But here's the truth they don't want you to know. Emotional detachment is not about becoming cold. It's about becoming free. It's about developing the ability to observe your emotions without being controlled by them. It's about maintaining your inner peace regardless of what's happening around you. And it's about creating space between yourself and the emotional chaos that keeps most people trapped in cycles of anxiety, frustration, and despair. The most successful people in the world, the ones who seem unshakable in the face of criticism, setbacks, and chaos, have mastered this art. They care deeply about their goals, their values, and their relationships. But they don't allow their emotions to dictate their decisions. They've learned to detach from outcomes without detaching from life itself. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by your emotions, if you've made decisions you regretted because you were angry or hurt, if you've lost sleep over things beyond your control, then this audiobook will change your life. You're about to learn the difference between healthy emotional detachment and toxic emotional numbness. You'll discover how to stay connected to what matters while freeing yourself from the emotional roller coaster that keeps most people stuck. By the time you finish listening, you'll have the tools to remain calm under pressure, make better decisions, and create the kind of inner peace that no external circumstance can disturb. But most importantly, you'll learn how to do all of this while still being a warm, caring, and deeply connected human being. Chapter 1. The Deadly Trap of Emotional Reactivity. Right now, your emotions are controlling your life. You might not realize it, but every day you're making decisions based on how you feel, rather than what's logical, rational, or beneficial for your long-term success. You're reacting instead of responding. You're being emotional instead of being strategic. And this single pattern is destroying your potential. Think about the last time you made a decision while angry. Maybe you sent an email you shouldn't have sent, said something you didn't mean, or quit something important because you were frustrated. Or think about the last time you avoided doing something necessary because you were afraid, anxious, or overwhelmed. These moments aren't isolated incidents. They're symptoms of a much deeper problem. You haven't learned to separate your emotions from your actions. The average person lives in a constant state of emotional reactivity. They wake up and immediately check their phone, allowing other people's posts, messages, and opinions to determine their mood for the day. They go to work and let their boss's attitude, their co-workers' comments, or their workload dictate how they feel about themselves. They come home and allow family conflicts, financial stress, or relationship issues to rob them of their peace. This is not living. This is existing as a victim of your own emotional responses. And the cost is enormous. When you're emotionally reactive, you make poor decisions. You say things you don't mean. You avoid challenges that could help you grow. You procrastinate on important tasks because they make you feel uncomfortable. You stay in situations that don't serve you because changing them feels scary. You let other people's moods and behaviors control your inner state. But here's what's even worse. Emotional reactivity creates a cycle that becomes harder and harder to break. The more you react emotionally to situations, the more your brain reinforces those neural pathways. Your nervous system becomes hypersensitive to triggers. Your default mode becomes anxiety, frustration, or overwhelm. You start to believe that this is just who you are, that you're naturally an anxious person, an angry person, or an emotional person. This is where most people get stuck. They accept their emotional reactivity as part of their personality. They say things like, "I'm just very sensitive," or "I care too much," or "I can't help how I feel." But this is a lie your brain tells you to keep you trapped. The truth is that emotional reactivity is not a personality trait. It's a habit. And like any habit, it can be changed. The problem is that most people don't know how to change it. They try to suppress their emotions, which doesn't work. They try to think positively, which is surface level at best. They try to avoid situations that trigger them, which limits their growth and potential. What they don't realize is that true emotional freedom doesn't come from controlling your emotions. It comes from detaching from them. Emotional detachment is not about becoming emotionless. It's about developing the ability to observe your emotions without being consumed by them. It's about creating space between the stimulus and your response. It's about choosing how you want to react rather than being forced into automatic patterns that don't serve you. When you master emotional detachment, everything changes. You stop taking things personally because you understand that other people's behavior is about them, not you. You stop making decisions based on temporary feelings because you can see beyond the immediate emotional reaction. You stop avoiding challenges because fear no longer has the power to paralyze you. You become the kind of person who stays calm in crisis, who makes rational decisions under pressure, and who maintains their inner peace regardless of external circumstances. But most people never develop this skill because they've been taught that detachment equals coldness. They think that if they stop feeling everything so intensely, they'll lose their humanity. They believe that emotional reactivity is a sign that they care, and that detachment means they don't care about anything. This fundamental misunderstanding keeps them trapped in cycles of emotional chaos that destroy their potential and their peace. The truth is that emotional detachment actually increases your capacity for genuine connection, clear thinking, and effective action. When you're not controlled by your emotions, you can respond to situations from a place of wisdom rather than reactivity. You can be present with other people without absorbing their emotional state. You can make decisions based on your values and goals rather than your momentary feelings. This is not about becoming a robot. This is not about shutting down your heart or disconnecting from the world. This is about developing the emotional intelligence to know when your feelings are helpful and when they're harmful. It's about learning to use your emotions as information rather than letting them use you as their puppet. Every successful person you admire has mastered this skill to some degree. They've learned to detach from criticism without detaching from feedback. They've learned to detach from setbacks without detaching from their goals. They've learned to detach from other people's opinions without detaching from meaningful relationships. This is what separates high achievers from everyone else. They don't let their emotional reactions determine their actions. Chapter 2. Why most people confuse detachment with being cold. The biggest mistake people make when they hear about emotional detachment is thinking it means becoming cold, heartless, or disconnected from others. This misconception keeps millions of people trapped in emotional reactivity because they're afraid that developing detachment will turn them into someone they don't want to be. They imagine emotionally detached people as robotic, uncaring, and isolated from meaningful relationships. This fear is understandable because our culture has completely misrepresented what healthy emotional detachment looks like. We've been conditioned to believe that caring means suffering, that love means anxiety, and that being emotionally invested means being emotionally reactive. We see people who seem calm and composed and assume they must be cold or disconnected. We mistake emotional regulation for emotional suppression. But there's a massive difference between healthy detachment and toxic emotional numbness. Healthy detachment is about maintaining your inner peace while still being fully engaged with life. It's about caring deeply about outcomes without being destroyed when things don't go as planned. It's about loving people without trying to control them. It's about pursuing goals without your self-worth being dependent on achieving them. Toxic emotional numbness, on the other hand, is about shutting down completely. It's about avoiding feelings because they're too painful to experience. It's about disconnecting from relationships because vulnerability feels too risky. It's about giving up on goals because caring about them hurts too much. This is not detachment. This is dissociation, avoidance, and emotional suppression. The confusion between these two approaches has created a false choice in most people's minds. They think their only options are to either feel everything intensely and be emotionally reactive, or to shut down completely and become cold and disconnected. They don't realize there's a third option: feeling fully while maintaining your center. Think about the calmest, most composed person you know. Chances are they're not emotionless. They're not cold or uncaring. They simply don't let their emotions control their behavior. They can be disappointed without being devastated. They can be excited without being manic. They can be concerned without being anxious. They feel their emotions fully, but they don't let those emotions dictate their actions. This is what true emotional maturity looks like. It's not about having fewer feelings. It's about having a better relationship with the feelings you have. It's about developing the ability to experience emotions without being overwhelmed by them. It's about creating enough space between yourself and your emotional reactions that you can choose how to respond, rather than being forced into automatic patterns. Most people never develop this skill because they've been taught that intense emotional reactions are normal and even admirable. They've been told that if you don't worry about something, you don't care about it. They've been conditioned to believe that anxiety is the same as concern, that anger is the same as passion, and that emotional intensity is the same as emotional depth. But this is backwards thinking. True emotional depth comes from being able to experience the full spectrum of human emotion without being controlled by any single feeling. It comes from having enough emotional intelligence to know which emotions are serving you and which ones are sabotaging you. It comes from developing the wisdom to know when to engage with your emotions and when to detach from them. Consider how much energy you waste on emotional reactions that don't serve you. How much time do you spend worrying about things beyond your control? How often do you replay conversations in your head, getting angry about something someone said? How frequently do you avoid taking action because you're afraid of how you might feel if things don't work out? All of this emotional reactivity is stealing your power and limiting your potential. When you learn healthy emotional detachment, you reclaim that energy. Instead of spending your mental and emotional resources on reactions you can't control, you invest them in actions that can actually improve your situation. Instead of being at the mercy of your emotional responses, you become the architect of your emotional experience. This doesn't make you cold or heartless. It makes you effective. It makes you resilient. It makes you the kind of person others can rely on because they know you won't fall apart when things get difficult. You become someone who can be fully present in relationships because you're not constantly managing your own emotional chaos. The people who seem coldest are usually those who are most afraid of their emotions. They've shut down not because they don't feel, but because they feel too much and haven't learned how to manage it. True emotional detachment actually requires tremendous emotional intelligence and self-awareness. You have to understand your emotions deeply in order to develop a healthy relationship with them. When you master this skill, you'll discover something remarkable. You can care more deeply about things that matter while caring less about things that don't. You can love people more fully because you're not trying to control their behavior. You can pursue goals more passionately because your self-worth isn't dependent on achieving them. You can experience setbacks without being destroyed by them because your identity isn't tied to your temporary circumstances. This is the paradox of emotional detachment. The less attached you are to specific outcomes, the more engaged you can be with the process. The less you need things to go your way, the more effective you become at making things go your way. The less you try to control your emotions, the more emotional freedom you experience. Chapter 3. The Neuroscience of Emotional Freedom. Your brain is not designed for the modern world. The emotional circuits that helped your ancestors survive in dangerous environments are now sabotaging your success in today's complex society. Understanding this neuroscience is crucial because you can't change what you don't understand. And most people are fighting their biology without realizing it. Deep in your brain, there's a small almond-shaped structure called the amygdala. This is your brain's alarm system, constantly scanning your environment for threats and triggering emotional responses designed to keep you alive. When your ancestors faced a predator, the amygdala would flood their system with stress hormones, preparing them to fight or flee. This response was perfect for immediate physical threats that required instant action. But your modern amygdala can't tell the difference between a saber-toothed tiger and a critical email from your boss. It responds to social rejection the same way it responds to physical danger. It treats financial stress like a life or death emergency. It interprets uncertainty as an immediate threat to your survival. And every time it gets triggered, it hijacks your rational thinking and forces you into emotional reactivity. This is why you feel anxious about things that aren't actually dangerous. This is why you get angry about situations that don't require aggression. This is why you feel overwhelmed by challenges that are actually manageable. Your ancient brain is constantly misinterpreting modern situations and triggering inappropriate emotional responses. The problem gets worse when you understand how neural pathways work. Every time you react emotionally to a situation, you strengthen the neural pathway that created that reaction. Your brain literally rewires itself based on how you respond to events. If you consistently react to stress with anxiety, you're training your brain to be anxious. If you regularly respond to criticism with anger, you're programming yourself to be defensive. If you habitually avoid challenges because they make you uncomfortable, you're conditioning yourself to be avoidant. This is why emotional reactivity becomes a self-reinforcing cycle. The more you react, the more reactive you become. The more you worry, the more your brain looks for things to worry about. The more you take things personally, the more everything feels personal. You're literally sculpting your brain through your habitual responses. And most people are sculpting themselves into anxious, reactive, emotionally unstable versions of who they could be. But here's the good news. Neuroplasticity works both ways. Just as you can train your brain to be reactive, you can train it to be detached. Just as you can condition yourself to be anxious, you can condition yourself to be calm. Just as you can program yourself to take things personally, you can reprogram yourself to maintain perspective. The key is understanding how to work with your neurology rather than against it. When you practice emotional detachment, you're literally changing your brain structure. You're weakening the neural pathways that create automatic reactive responses. And you're strengthening the pathways that create thoughtful, intentional responses. You're training your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for rational thinking and emotional regulation, to override your amygdala's alarm signals. This process takes time because you're essentially reprogramming millions of years of evolutionary conditioning. Your brain wants to keep you safe, and it's been trained to interpret emotional intensity as a survival mechanism. But with consistent practice, you can teach your nervous system that calmness is actually safer than reactivity, that detachment is more effective than emotional investment, and that responding is more powerful than reacting. The key is creating space between stimulus and response. When something triggers an emotional reaction, there's a brief moment before your automatic response kicks in. Most people never notice this moment because their reactions happen so quickly. But with practice, you can learn to recognize this gap and use it to choose your response rather than being forced into your conditioning. This is where mindfulness becomes crucial. Mindfulness is not just about meditation or spiritual practice. It's about developing the neurological capacity to observe your thoughts and emotions without being consumed by them. It's about training your brain to notice what's happening internally without automatically reacting to it. When you can observe your emotions as mental events rather than absolute truths, you gain the power to choose how to respond to them. Research has shown that people who practice mindfulness regularly have physically different brains than those who don't. Their amygdalas are less reactive, their prefrontal cortex is more developed, and their neural pathways for emotional regulation are stronger. They've literally rewired their brains for emotional freedom. But mindfulness alone isn't enough. You also need to understand the role of your nervous system in emotional reactivity. Your autonomic nervous system has two main branches. The sympathetic system, which activates your fight or flight response, and the parasympathetic system, which activates your rest and digest response. Most emotionally reactive people live in a chronic state of sympathetic activation, which keeps them in a constant state of emotional arousal. Learning to activate your parasympathetic nervous system is essential for emotional detachment. This means developing practices that signal safety to your nervous system. Deep breathing, progressive muscle relaxation, spending time in nature, engaging in creative activities, and cultivating positive social connections. When your nervous system feels safe, your amygdala calms down, and your prefrontal cortex comes back online. You can also use your understanding of neuroscience to reframe how you think about emotions. Instead of seeing emotions as facts about reality, you can learn to see them as information from your nervous system. Anxiety isn't telling you that something bad is definitely going to happen. It's telling you that your brain has detected something it interprets as a potential threat. Anger isn't telling you that someone has wronged you. It's telling you that your brain perceives a violation of your expectations or boundaries. When you understand emotions as neurological events rather than absolute truths, you can develop a healthier relationship with them. You can appreciate the information they provide without being controlled by the intensity they create. You can acknowledge their presence without letting them dictate your behavior. This scientific understanding is liberating because it removes the moral judgment from emotional reactions. You're not weak for feeling anxious. You're not bad for getting angry. You're not broken for being sensitive. You're simply experiencing the natural result of how your brain has been conditioned to respond to certain stimuli. And once you understand the conditioning, you can begin to change it. The goal isn't to eliminate emotions. Emotions provide valuable information about your internal state and your environment. The goal is to develop the neurological capacity to experience emotions without being overwhelmed by them. It's to create enough space between your emotional reactions and your behavioral responses that you can choose actions based on wisdom rather than reactivity. Chapter 4. The 3 levels of emotional detachment. Not all emotional detachment is created equal. There are 3 distinct levels of detachment, each with its own characteristics, benefits, and challenges. Understanding these levels is crucial because most people either aim too low and remain trapped in reactivity, or they aim too high and become disconnected from life itself. The key is finding the level that serves your goals while maintaining your humanity. Level 1 is situational detachment. This is the most basic form of emotional detachment, and it's where most people should start. Situational detachment means developing the ability to step back from specific circumstances that trigger emotional reactions. Instead of being consumed by immediate frustrations, setbacks, or conflicts, you learn to view these situations with perspective and objectivity. Situational detachment doesn't require you to change your entire personality or emotional nature. It simply asks you to develop the skill of pausing before reacting to challenging circumstances. When someone criticizes your work, instead of immediately becoming defensive, you take a moment to consider whether their feedback has merit. When you encounter a setback in your goals, instead of spiraling into despair, you ask yourself what you can learn from the experience. When you face uncertainty about the future, instead of drowning in anxiety, you focus on what you can control in the present moment. This level of detachment is highly practical and immediately useful. It allows you to make better decisions under pressure, maintain your composure during conflicts, and bounce back more quickly from disappointments. You're still fully engaged with life, still caring deeply about outcomes, but you're not allowing temporary circumstances to hijack your emotional state. Most people can achieve situational detachment with consistent practice. It requires developing self-awareness about your emotional triggers, learning to recognize when you're becoming reactive, and implementing simple techniques to create space between stimulus and response. The goal isn't to never feel negative emotions, but to prevent those emotions from controlling your behavior. Level 2 is outcome detachment. This is a more advanced form of emotional freedom that requires you to separate your emotional well-being from the results of your efforts. Outcome detachment means caring deeply about your goals and working intensely toward them, while simultaneously being at peace with whatever happens. This level of detachment is more challenging because it goes against our natural tendency to tie our self-worth to our achievements. Most people derive their sense of identity from their successes and failures. They feel good about themselves when things go well and terrible about themselves when things go poorly. This creates an emotional roller coaster that makes it impossible to maintain inner peace. Outcome detachment requires you to find your sense of worth in your effort and intention rather than your results. You measure success by whether you showed up fully, whether you gave your best effort, and whether you acted in alignment with your values. The actual outcomes become secondary to the process of becoming the person you want to be. This doesn't mean becoming passive or lowering your standards. People who master outcome detachment often achieve more than those who are emotionally attached to results because they're not paralyzed by fear of failure. They can take bigger risks, persist longer through setbacks, and maintain their motivation even when progress is slow. They understand that attachment to outcomes actually interferes with achieving those outcomes. Outcome detachment is particularly powerful in areas like relationships, career advancement, and creative pursuits. When you're not desperately attached to being loved by a specific person, you become more attractive because you're not needy or controlling. When you're not frantically trying to get promoted, you can focus on doing excellent work instead of playing political games. When you're not obsessed with how your creative work will be received, you can focus on authentic expression instead of trying to please everyone. Level 3 is existential detachment. This is the deepest level of emotional freedom, and it's not appropriate or necessary for most people. Existential detachment involves stepping back from the entire drama of human existence and viewing life from a cosmic or spiritual perspective. People who achieve this level often describe feeling like they're watching their life unfold rather than being completely immersed in it. Existential detachment can be profoundly peaceful, but it can also lead to disconnection from normal human experiences. People at this level may struggle to engage with everyday concerns that seem trivial from their expanded perspective. They may find it difficult to maintain motivation for conventional goals or to relate to people who are caught up in what they perceive as meaningless dramas. This level of detachment is often the result of spiritual practice, psychedelic experiences, or profound life changes that shift someone's entire worldview. While it can provide tremendous inner peace and wisdom, it can also create challenges in navigating practical life requirements and maintaining close relationships. For most people, Level 2 outcome detachment is the optimal target. It provides the emotional freedom and inner peace that make life more enjoyable, while maintaining the engagement and motivation necessary for achievement and connection. It allows you to play the game of life fully while remembering that it's ultimately just a game. The key is understanding that these levels are not necessarily permanent states. You might operate at different levels in different areas of your life or at different times. You might be completely detached from your career outcomes while remaining emotionally invested in your family relationships. You might practice situational detachment during stressful periods while developing outcome detachment as a long-term goal. The progression through these levels is not linear. You might experience glimpses of outcome detachment during meditation or moments of crisis, then return to working on situational detachment in your daily life. The important thing is to understand where you are and where you want to be. Then choose practices that support your development. What's crucial to remember is that higher levels of detachment are not automatically better. The goal is not to become as detached as possible, but to develop the appropriate level of detachment for your life circumstances and personal goals. Someone raising young children might need to maintain more emotional investment than someone in a contemplative phase of life. Someone building a business might need more outcome attachment than someone focused on spiritual development. The art is in knowing when to engage and when to detach, when to care deeply and when to let go, when to fight for what you want and when to accept what is. This flexibility, this ability to move fluidly between engagement and detachment as circumstances require, is the hallmark of true emotional intelligence. Chapter 5. Breaking free from other people's emotions. One of the biggest challenges to emotional detachment is learning to separate your emotional state from the emotional states of the people around you. If you're naturally empathetic or sensitive, you've probably spent your entire life unconsciously absorbing other people's feelings, moods, and energy. You walk into a room and immediately sense the tension. You have a conversation with an anxious person and leave feeling anxious yourself. You watch the news and feel personally affected by tragedies happening to strangers on the other side of the world. This emotional absorption is often mistaken for compassion, but it's actually a form of emotional codependence that serves no one. When you take on other people's emotions, you don't help them feel better. You just add your own suffering to theirs. You become less capable of providing genuine support because you're too busy managing your own emotional reactions. You lose your center, your clarity, and your ability to respond effectively to the situation. The truth is that you are not responsible for other people's emotions, and other people's emotions are not your responsibility. This doesn't mean you don't care about others or that you ignore their feelings. It means you recognize that everyone is having their own emotional experience, and trying to control or absorb those experiences is both impossible and harmful. Most people struggle with this concept because they've been conditioned to believe that love means taking on other people's pain. They think that if they don't worry about someone, they don't care about them. They believe that staying calm when others are upset means they're being callous or unsupportive. But this is backwards thinking that creates suffering for everyone involved. Consider how much more helpful you can be when you maintain your emotional equilibrium. When your friend is panicking about a problem, they don't need you to panic with them. They need you to stay calm so you can think clearly and offer practical support. When your family member is angry about something, they don't need you to get angry too. They need you to remain grounded so you can listen without getting defensive and help them process their feelings. Your emotional stability becomes a gift you give to others. It creates a safe space where people can feel their emotions fully without fear that they'll overwhelm you or push you away. It allows you to be truly present with someone's pain without being consumed by it. It gives you the clarity to know when to offer advice, when to just listen, and when to set boundaries. But breaking free from emotional absorption requires more than just intellectual understanding. It requires developing practical skills for maintaining your energetic boundaries. You need to learn how to be empathetic without being a sponge, how to care without carrying, and how to support without sacrificing your own well-being. The first step is recognizing when you're absorbing emotions that aren't yours. Many sensitive people are so accustomed to taking on other people's feelings that they don't even realize they're doing it. You might think you're naturally anxious, when in reality, you're picking up anxiety from your environment. You might believe you're depressed, when you're actually absorbing depression from family members or friends. You might assume you're angry about your own life, when you're unconsciously carrying anger that belongs to someone else. Start paying attention to how your emotional state changes in different environments and around different people. Notice if you feel drained after spending time with certain individuals. Observe whether your mood shifts dramatically based on the emotional atmosphere of your workplace or home. Become aware of how media consumption affects your mental and emotional state. Once you start recognizing emotional absorption, you can begin to practice energetic boundaries. This means consciously choosing which emotions you allow into your system and which ones you observe without taking on. It means developing the ability to witness someone else's emotional experience without making it your own. One effective technique is emotional labeling. When you notice yourself feeling upset after interacting with someone, pause and ask yourself, is this feeling mine, or am I picking it up from someone else? Often, simply asking this question creates enough distance to break the automatic absorption pattern. If the emotion doesn't feel authentically yours, you can acknowledge its presence without claiming ownership of it. Another powerful practice is energetic hygiene. Just as you shower to clean your physical body, you need practices to cleanse your energetic body of emotions and energy that don't belong to you. This might involve meditation, spending time in nature, physical exercise, creative expression, or whatever helps you return to your natural emotional state. You can also use visualization techniques to strengthen your energetic boundaries. Imagine yourself surrounded by a protective bubble that allows love and positive energy to pass through while filtering out negative emotions that aren't yours. Visualize roots extending from your body into the earth, grounding you in your own energy and preventing you from floating away in someone else's emotional storm. Learning to set emotional boundaries is crucial for maintaining your detachment. This means being willing to step away from conversations that are becoming emotionally overwhelming, limiting your exposure to chronically negative people, and refusing to take responsibility for other people's emotional states. It means learning to say no to emotional manipulation and guilt trips. Many people resist setting these boundaries because they're afraid of seeming selfish or uncaring. But maintaining your emotional equilibrium actually makes you more caring, not less. When you're not constantly overwhelmed by other people's emotions, you have more energy to offer genuine support. When you're not trying to fix everyone's feelings, you can be truly present with their experience. When you're not taking things personally, you can respond with wisdom rather than reactivity. The goal is to develop what could be called loving detachment. This means caring deeply about people while refusing to carry their emotional burdens. It means offering support without taking responsibility for outcomes. It means being present with someone's pain without trying to eliminate it for them. This kind of detachment actually deepens your relationships because it removes the codependent dynamics that keep people stuck. When you stop trying to manage other people's emotions, you give them the space to develop their own emotional intelligence. When you stop absorbing their feelings, you model what healthy emotional boundaries look like. When you maintain your own center, you become someone others can rely on for stability and wisdom. Remember, your emotional state is your responsibility, and it's also your power. Every time you allow someone else's emotions to control how you feel, you're giving away your power to choose your own experience. Every time you absorb emotions that don't belong to you, you're diluting your own emotional clarity. Every time you try to fix someone else's feelings, you're preventing them from developing their own emotional resilience. True compassion means allowing people to have their own emotional experiences while offering support from a place of strength rather than shared suffering. It means caring without carrying, loving without losing yourself, and supporting without sacrificing your own well-being. This is not selfishness. This is emotional intelligence, and it's the foundation of healthy relationships and genuine service to others. Chapter 6. The Art of Observing Without Reacting. The most powerful skill you can develop is the ability to observe your thoughts and emotions without immediately reacting to them. Most people are completely identified with their mental and emotional activity. When they have a thought, they believe it. When they feel an emotion, they become it. When something happens, they react automatically. This complete identification with their internal experience is what keeps them trapped in cycles of reactivity and suffering. But you are not your thoughts. You are not your emotions. You are the awareness that observes them. This distinction is not philosophical theory. It's practical psychology that can transform your life. When you learn to step back and observe your internal experience rather than being consumed by it, you gain the power to choose your responses instead of being forced into automatic reactions. Think about it this way. Right now, you're aware that you're listening to these words, but you're also aware of other things happening simultaneously. You might notice sounds in your environment, physical sensations in your body, or thoughts commenting on what you're hearing. This awareness that notices all these different experiences is constant and unchanging, even though the things it observes are constantly shifting. This observing awareness is your true self. Everything else, your thoughts, emotions, sensations, and experiences, are temporary events happening within this awareness. When you identify with the temporary events, you get caught up in their drama. When you identify with the observing awareness, you gain perspective and freedom. Developing this observer perspective requires practice because your brain has been conditioned to immediately react to whatever arises in your experience. You've been trained to believe that every thought is important, every emotion is meaningful, and every sensation requires attention. But this is not true. Most of your thoughts are repetitive mental chatter. Most of your emotions are conditioned responses to familiar triggers. Most of your sensations are just information about your current state. The key is learning to notice what's happening in your mind without getting pulled into the content. When you feel angry, instead of immediately justifying why you should be angry or trying to eliminate the anger, you simply notice there is anger present. When you have an anxious thought, instead of believing the thought or fighting with it, you observe there is an anxious thought arising. When you feel disappointed, instead of wallowing in the disappointment or pushing it away, you acknowledge there is disappointment here. This simple shift in language creates profound change in your relationship with your experience. Instead of saying, "I am angry," you say, "There is anger." Instead of saying, "I am anxious," you say, "There is anxiety." Instead of saying, "I am sad," you say, "There is sadness." This subtle change in perspective creates space between you and your emotional reactions, giving you room to choose how to respond. The practice of observing without reacting is like developing a muscle. At first, it feels awkward and unnatural. Your conditioned patterns will pull you back into identification with whatever you're experiencing. You'll catch yourself getting lost in thoughts, carried away by emotions, or reacting automatically to triggers. This is normal and expected. The goal is not to never get caught up in your experience, but to catch yourself more quickly and return to the observer perspective more easily. Start with simple observations throughout your day. Notice when you're thinking without getting involved in the content of your thoughts. Observe when emotions arise without immediately judging them as good or bad. Pay attention to physical sensations without automatically trying to change them. Practice watching your reactions to external events without being consumed by those reactions. One powerful technique is to narrate your experience as if you were a neutral scientist studying your own mind. I notice tension in my shoulders. I observe thoughts about tomorrow's meeting. I see frustration arising about this traffic. I feel excitement about this opportunity. This narration helps you maintain the observer perspective instead of becoming completely identified with whatever you're experiencing. Another effective practice is to ask yourself questions that shift you into observer mode. What am I thinking right now? What am I feeling in this moment? What sensations are present in my body? What story am I telling myself about this situation? These questions activate your observing awareness and create distance from whatever you're experiencing. The observer perspective is particularly powerful during emotional triggers. When someone says something that normally would make you angry, instead of immediately defending yourself or attacking them, you can observe. There is anger arising. There is a desire to defend. There is tension in my chest. This observation creates enough space for you to choose a response, instead of being forced into a reaction. Over time, this practice fundamentally changes your relationship with your inner experience. You begin to see thoughts as mental events rather than absolute truths. You start to experience emotions as temporary visitors rather than permanent residents. You recognize sensations as information rather than commands. You realize that you can observe all of these experiences without being controlled by any of them. This doesn't mean you become passive or indifferent to your experience. You still feel fully and think clearly. The difference is that you're no longer at the mercy of whatever arises in your awareness. You can engage with thoughts that are useful and let go of thoughts that aren't. You can feel emotions fully without being overwhelmed by them. You can respond to sensations appropriately without being compulsive about them. The observer perspective also reveals something profound about the nature of your problems. Most of your suffering comes not from what happens to you, but from your resistance to what happens to you. When you observe your experience without immediately judging it or trying to change it, you often discover that the experience itself is manageable. It's your reaction to the experience that creates the suffering. This practice is the foundation of all emotional detachment, because it gives you access to the part of yourself that remains calm and centered, regardless of what's happening around you or within you. This observing awareness never gets angry, anxious, or depressed. It simply witnesses whatever arises with complete equanimity. The more you identify with this awareness rather than with your temporary experiences, the more unshakable your inner peace becomes. Chapter 7. How to detach from outcomes without losing motivation. One of the biggest misconceptions about emotional detachment is that it requires you to stop caring about results or to lower your standards for success. People fear that if they detach from outcomes, they'll become lazy, unmotivated, or willing to accept mediocrity. This fear keeps them trapped in anxiety-driven achievement cycles where their self-worth depends entirely on external results. But true outcome detachment actually increases your effectiveness rather than decreasing it. When you're not desperately attached to specific results, You can focus completely on the process of achieving those results. When you're not paralyzed by fear of failure, you can take bigger risks and bounce back more quickly from setbacks. When you're not consumed by anxiety about whether things will work out, you can bring your full attention and creativity to the task at hand. The key is understanding the difference between caring and attachment. Caring means you value something and you're willing to invest effort in achieving it. Attachment means your emotional well-being depends on getting the specific result you want. You can care deeply about your goals while remaining detached from whether you achieve them exactly as planned. Think about the most successful people you know or admire. They typically share certain characteristics. They work incredibly hard toward their goals, but they don't fall apart when things don't go as expected. They care deeply about their vision, but they're flexible about the path to get there. They're highly motivated by their mission, but their self-worth isn't destroyed by temporary setbacks. This is outcome detachment in action. Outcome detachment begins with recognizing that you can only control your effort, not your results. You can control how much time you invest, how much energy you bring, how much skill you develop, and how much persistence you demonstrate. You cannot control market conditions, other people's decisions, timing, luck, or countless other variables that influence outcomes. When you try to control results directly, you waste enormous energy on things outside your influence while neglecting the things you can actually control. This doesn't mean you become passive about your goals. It means you become more strategic about where you focus your attention. Instead of obsessing about whether you'll get the promotion, you focus on doing excellent work and developing the skills that make you promotable. Instead of worrying about whether someone will love you back, you focus on becoming the kind of person who attracts healthy relationships. Instead of stressing about whether your business will succeed, you focus on providing value to customers and adapting based on feedback. The paradox is that the more attached you are to outcomes, the less likely you are to achieve them. Attachment creates anxiety, and anxiety interferes with performance. Attachment makes you risk-averse, and meaningful success requires taking calculated risks. Attachment makes you focus on short-term results instead of long-term development. Attachment makes you try to control things you can't control while neglecting things you can control. Detachment, on the other hand, keeps you focused on the process rather than the outcome. It allows you to maintain perspective during setbacks and to stay grounded during successes. It enables you to learn from failures instead of being destroyed by them. It gives you the emotional freedom to persist when results are slow to come. To develop outcome detachment, start by redefining how you measure success. Instead of measuring success only by external results, include process-based metrics in your evaluation. Ask yourself, did I give my best effort? Did I act in alignment with my values? Did I learn something valuable from this experience? Did I grow as a person through this challenge? These process-based measures give you ways to feel successful even when external results don't match your expectations. Another powerful practice is to regularly remind yourself of what you can and cannot control. Make two lists, one of factors you can influence in pursuing your goal, and another of factors completely outside your control. Whenever you catch yourself worrying about or trying to manipulate factors from the second list, redirect your attention to the first list. This mental discipline keeps you focused on productive action rather than wasteful anxiety. You can also use visualization to practice outcome detachment. Imagine yourself working toward your goal with complete dedication and passion, but also imagine various outcomes. Complete success, partial success, failure, and everything in between. See yourself responding to each scenario with equanimity and wisdom. This mental rehearsal prepares you to maintain your center regardless of what actually happens. Outcome detachment also requires developing a longer-term perspective on success and failure. Most outcomes that seem crucial in the moment turn out to be far less significant in the context of your entire life. The job you didn't get might lead to a better opportunity. The relationship that ended might clear the path for a more compatible partner. The business that failed might teach you lessons essential for your next venture. This perspective doesn't minimize the real challenges and disappointments of not getting what you want. It simply helps you maintain hope and motivation, even when current results are discouraging. It reminds you that your path to fulfillment rarely follows a straight line, and that apparent setbacks are often redirections towards something better. One of the most liberating aspects of outcome detachment is that it frees you to enjoy the journey rather than postponing happiness until you reach your destination. When you're attached to outcomes, you tell yourself you'll be happy when you get the promotion, find the relationship, make the money, or achieve the recognition. This conditional happiness ensures that you spend most of your life waiting to feel good about yourself and your circumstances. Outcome detachment allows you to find satisfaction in the process of growth, learning, and contribution. You can enjoy the challenge of developing new skills, the excitement of creative problem-solving, and the satisfaction of giving your best effort. Your happiness becomes independent of external circumstances, which makes you more resilient and more attractive to opportunities. Remember that outcome detachment is not about lowering your standards or accepting mediocrity. It's about raising your standards for how you show up in the process while releasing your grip on specific results. It's about committing fully to your vision while remaining flexible about the path to achieve it. It's about caring deeply while holding lightly. This balance between caring and detachment is what allows truly successful people to maintain their motivation through inevitable setbacks and to stay humble through inevitable successes. They understand that results are important feedback about the effectiveness of their actions, but they don't let those results determine their self-worth or their commitment to their mission. Chapter 8. Mastering Emotional Triggers and Hot Buttons. Everyone has emotional triggers, those specific situations, words, or behaviors that instantly activate intense emotional reactions. Maybe it's being criticized, feeling excluded, being told you're wrong, or having your competence questioned. These triggers bypass your rational mind and send you straight into reactive mode, often causing you to say or do things you later regret. Understanding and mastering your emotional triggers is essential for developing true emotional detachment. Your triggers are not random. They're typically connected to your deepest fears, insecurities, and unhealed wounds. They represent areas where you're still unconsciously seeking validation, approval, or recognition from others. When someone or something activates these vulnerable spots, your nervous system interprets it as a threat to your identity or self-worth, triggering an automatic defensive response. The first step in mastering your triggers is identifying them with brutal honesty. What situations consistently make you lose your emotional equilibrium? What types of comments send you into defensive mode? What behaviors from others make you feel angry, hurt, or anxious? What circumstances cause you to react in ways that don't align with your values or goals? Many people avoid this self-examination because it requires acknowledging their vulnerabilities. It's easier to blame other people for making you feel certain ways than to take responsibility for your own emotional reactions. But until you own your triggers, they will continue to control you. Until you understand what activates your defensive patterns, you'll remain at the mercy of anyone who knowingly or unknowingly pushes your buttons. Once you've identified your triggers, the next step is understanding their origins. Most triggers are rooted in past experiences where you felt threatened, diminished, or invalidated. Maybe you were criticized harshly as a child, so now any feedback feels like an attack. Maybe you were excluded from social groups, so now feeling left out activates deep insecurity. Maybe you were made to feel incompetent, so now having your abilities questioned sends you into defensive mode. Understanding the origin of your triggers doesn't excuse your reactive behavior, but it does help you respond with compassion rather than judgment when they get activated. It also helps you realize that your triggers are often about the past rather than the present situation. When someone questions your decision, you might be reacting to childhood experiences of having your judgment dismissed rather than to the current conversation. The goal is not to eliminate your triggers entirely. That's neither realistic nor necessary. The goal is to increase the gap between trigger and reaction, giving yourself time to choose a response rather than being forced into an automatic pattern. This requires developing the ability to notice when you're being triggered before you react, which takes practice and self-awareness. Physical awareness is crucial for recognizing triggers early. Your body often signals that you're being triggered before your mind recognizes it. You might notice your jaw clenching, your shoulders tensing, your breathing becoming shallow, or your stomach tightening. These physical signals are your early warning system, alerting you that your nervous system is activating a defensive response. When you notice these physical signals, you can use them as cues to pause and create space before reacting. Take a few deep breaths to activate your parasympathetic nervous system. Count to 10 to give your rational mind time to come back online. Excuse yourself from the conversation if you need more time to process what's happening. The key is to buy yourself time to choose your response instead of being hijacked by your automatic reactions. You can also use reframing techniques to diffuse your triggers. When someone criticizes your work, instead of immediately interpreting it as an attack on your competence, you can reframe it as information about how to improve or as insight into their perspective. When someone seems to exclude you from something, instead of assuming it's personal rejection, you can consider other possible explanations for their behavior. This reframing is not about making excuses for poor behavior or denying real problems. It's about giving yourself options for how to interpret situations instead of being locked into trigger-based interpretations. When you have multiple ways to understand what's happening, you're less likely to react from your most wounded and defensive parts. Another powerful strategy is to prepare responses in advance for your most common triggers. If you know that being interrupted makes you angry, you can plan calm ways to address it. I'd like to finish my thought before hearing your perspective. If you know that being questioned about your decisions makes you defensive, you can prepare responses that invite dialogue. That's an interesting point. Let me explain my reasoning and hear your thoughts. Having prepared responses prevents you from scrambling for words when you're triggered, which often leads to saying things you don't mean or responding in ways that escalate conflict. When you've thought through how you want to handle common trigger situations, you can respond from your values rather than your wounds. It's also important to recognize that other people's behavior often says more about them than about you. When someone is critical, dismissive, or aggressive, they're usually expressing their own stress, insecurity, or pain rather than making accurate assessments about your worth or abilities. This understanding doesn't excuse inappropriate behavior, but it does help you avoid taking things personally. One of the most liberating realizations is that you don't need other people to behave differently for you to feel good about yourself. Your emotional well-being doesn't depend on receiving approval, validation, or recognition from others. When you stop needing other people to treat you a certain way in order for you to feel okay, their behavior loses its power to trigger you. This shift from external validation to internal validation is fundamental to emotional detachment. It means developing your own standards for measuring your worth that don't depend on other people's opinions or behaviors. It means learning to validate yourself when others don't, to encourage yourself when others criticize, and to maintain confidence in your abilities regardless of external feedback. The ultimate goal is to reach a place where you can observe your triggers arising without being controlled by them. You notice the familiar physical sensations, the predictable thoughts, and the automatic emotional responses, but you don't identify with them or let them dictate your behavior. You see them as conditioned patterns from your past, rather than accurate information about your current situation. This level of trigger mastery doesn't happen overnight. It requires consistent practice, self-compassion, and patience with yourself as you develop new response patterns. But every time you catch yourself before reacting, every time you choose a thoughtful response over an automatic reaction, you're rewiring your nervous system for greater emotional freedom. Remember that mastering your triggers is not about becoming passive or allowing others to treat you poorly. It's about responding to challenging situations from your strength rather than your wounds, from your wisdom rather than your reactivity, and from your values rather than your conditioning. When you're no longer controlled by your triggers, you become truly free to choose how you want to show up in any situation. Chapter 9. The power of perspective shifting. Your emotional reactions are not caused by what happens to you. They're caused by how you interpret what happens to you. This single insight is one of the most powerful tools for developing emotional detachment because it reveals that you have far more control over your emotional experience than you might realize. Every situation can be interpreted in multiple ways, and the interpretation you choose determines your emotional response. Most people believe their interpretations of events are objective facts rather than subjective choices. When someone doesn't return their call, they automatically conclude they're being ignored or rejected. When they receive feedback at work, they immediately assume it means they're incompetent. When their plans don't work out, they instantly decide it means they're unlucky or incapable. These interpretations feel so automatic and obvious that they don't realize they're choosing them. But every interpretation is a choice, even when it doesn't feel like one. The person who didn't return your call might be dealing with an emergency, might have technical problems, or might be processing your message carefully before responding. The feedback you received might indicate growth opportunities, might reflect your supervisor's communication style, or might reveal organizational priorities you weren't aware of. Your plans that didn't work out might be protecting you from problems you couldn't see, might be redirecting you toward better opportunities, or might be teaching you valuable lessons about adaptability. None of these alternative interpretations might be correct, but they're all possible. The point is that you have options for how to understand what happens to you, and the option you choose dramatically affects how you feel about the situation. When you realize you're choosing your interpretations, you gain the power to choose interpretations that serve you rather than ones that cause unnecessary suffering. This doesn't mean practicing positive thinking or denying reality. It means recognizing that reality is more complex than your initial interpretations suggest. It means acknowledging that you might not have all the information needed to draw accurate conclusions. It means staying open to multiple possible explanations for why things happen the way they do. One powerful perspective-shifting technique is to ask yourself, what else could this mean? When you catch yourself making negative interpretations about situations, pause and brainstorm at least 3 alternative explanations. This simple exercise breaks you out of tunnel vision and reminds you that your first interpretation is just one possibility among many. Another effective approach is to consider how someone you admire would interpret the situation. How would a wise mentor, a successful role model, or a spiritually mature person understand what you're experiencing? What perspective would allow them to remain calm and centered in similar circumstances? This mental exercise helps you access higher-level thinking instead of being trapped in reactive interpretations. You can also practice temporal perspective shifting by asking how you'll view this situation in different time frames. How important will this seem in 1 week, 1 month, 1 year, 5 years? This exercise often reveals that situations that feel catastrophic in the moment are actually minor blips in the larger context of your life. It helps you maintain proportion and avoid emotional overwhelm about temporary circumstances. Perspective shifting is particularly powerful for dealing with other people's behavior. When someone acts in ways that trigger your defensiveness, try to understand their behavior from their perspective. What might they be feeling or experiencing that would lead them to act this way? What pressures, fears, or needs might be driving their behavior? This doesn't excuse inappropriate behavior, but it helps you avoid taking things personally and allows you to respond with wisdom rather than reactivity. One of the most transformative perspective shifts is moving from victim consciousness to creator consciousness. Victim consciousness interprets challenges as things happening to you that you have no control over. Creator consciousness interprets challenges as opportunities to grow, learn, and develop resilience. Victim consciousness focuses on what you can't control and feels powerless. Creator consciousness focuses on what you can influence and takes responsibility for your response. This shift doesn't mean blaming yourself for things outside your control or pretending that genuine hardships aren't difficult. It means recognizing that regardless of what happens to you, you always have the power to choose your response. You can't always control what occurs in your life, but you can always control what it means to you and how you let it affect you. Another powerful reframe is moving from scarcity thinking to abundance thinking. Scarcity thinking interprets setbacks as evidence that there aren't enough opportunities, that success is limited, or that you're running out of time. Abundance thinking sees setbacks as course corrections, recognizes that opportunities are constantly emerging, and trusts that persistence and adaptation lead to eventual success. When you didn't get the job you wanted, Scarcity thinking says there are no good opportunities left, and you'll never find work you love. Abundance thinking says this frees you to find an even better fit, and that the right opportunity is still coming. When a relationship ends, scarcity thinking says you'll never find love again, and there's something wrong with you. Abundance thinking says you've learned valuable lessons about compatibility, and you're now more prepared for a healthy relationship. You can also practice philosophical perspective shifting by considering different wisdom traditions' approaches to challenges. How would a Stoic philosopher view your current difficulties? They might see them as opportunities to practice virtue and build character. How would a Buddhist approach your suffering? They might view it as an inevitable part of human existence that can lead to greater compassion and understanding. How would someone with deep faith interpret your struggles? They might see them as part of a larger plan that you can't fully understand yet. The goal is not to find the right perspective, but to realize that you have options. When you're stuck in one interpretation that's causing you suffering, exploring alternative perspectives can free you from that suffering. When you're feeling hopeless about a situation, shifting to a different viewpoint can restore your sense of possibility and agency. Perspective shifting becomes easier with practice because it's essentially a form of mental flexibility training. The more you consciously choose different interpretations, the more natural it becomes to see situations from multiple angles. You develop what could be called interpretive agility that prevents you from getting stuck in rigid, suffering-inducing viewpoints. This skill is invaluable for maintaining emotional detachment because it prevents you from being trapped by limiting interpretations of your experience. When you realize that your emotional reactions are based on interpretations you're choosing, you gain tremendous power over your emotional state. You become the author of your own experience rather than the victim of circumstances and other people's behavior. Chapter 10. Building unshakable inner peace. Inner peace is not the absence of challenges, conflicts, or difficulties. It's the presence of an unshakable center that remains calm regardless of what's happening around you. Most people think they'll find peace when their external circumstances improve, when their problems are solved, or when everyone in their life behaves the way they want. But this approach to peace is conditional and fragile because it depends on controlling things outside your influence. True inner peace is unconditional. It exists independently of your circumstances, relationships, achievements, or external validation. It's a state of being that you can access regardless of what's happening in your life. This kind of peace is not passive resignation or emotional numbness. It's an active state of centered awareness that allows you to remain grounded while fully engaging with life's challenges and opportunities. Building unshakable inner peace requires understanding that peace is your natural state. Beneath all the mental chatter, emotional reactivity, and external drama, there exists a part of you that is always calm, always whole, and always at peace. This peaceful essence is not something you need to create or achieve. It's something you need to uncover by removing the layers of conditioning, reactivity, and identification that obscure it. Your thinking mind is the primary obstacle to accessing this natural peace. Your mind is constantly generating thoughts, judgments, stories, and interpretations about your experience. It's analyzing the past, planning for the future, and commenting on the present. This mental activity is not inherently problematic, but when you identify completely with your thoughts, they disturb your peace. The key is learning to use your mind as a tool rather than being used by it. This means developing the ability to think when thinking is helpful and to be still when stillness is more appropriate. It means recognizing that thoughts are mental events occurring within your awareness, rather than absolute truths about reality. When you can observe your thoughts without being consumed by them, you regain access to the peace that exists beneath the mental noise. Emotional reactivity is another major disturbance to inner peace. When you're constantly reacting to internal and external triggers, you live in a perpetual state of agitation. Every emotion feels urgent and important. Every situation seems to require an immediate emotional response. Every challenge feels like a threat to your well-being. This reactive mode makes sustainable peace impossible because you're always responding to the latest emotional emergency. Developing emotional detachment, as we've discussed throughout this audiobook, is essential for inner peace. When you can observe emotions without being controlled by them, when you can feel without being overwhelmed, and when you can respond rather than react, you create space for peace to emerge naturally. Emotions become information rather than commands, temporary visitors rather than permanent residents. Another crucial element of inner peace is accepting what you cannot control. Much of your mental and emotional energy is wasted on trying to control outcomes, other people's behavior, and external circumstances that are completely outside your influence. This futile effort to control the uncontrollable creates constant frustration, anxiety, and agitation. Peace comes from focusing your energy on what you can actually influence: your thoughts, your responses, your choices, and your actions. When you stop fighting reality and start working with it, you free up enormous amounts of energy that can be redirected toward creating positive change in areas where you do have power. This acceptance does not mean passive resignation or giving up on your goals. It means distinguishing between what you can influence and what you cannot, then putting your energy where it can be most effective. It means caring deeply about your vision while holding loosely to specific outcomes. It means doing your best while being at peace with whatever results. Cultivating present moment awareness is fundamental to inner peace, because peace only exists in the present. Your mind creates suffering by dwelling on past events that cannot be changed or worrying about future scenarios that may never occur. When you bring your attention fully into the current moment, you discover that right now, in this instant, you are okay. Whatever challenges you're facing, whatever problems you need to solve, whatever goals you're pursuing, you are safe and whole in this moment. This doesn't mean ignoring practical planning for the future or learning from past experiences. It means recognizing that your actual life is happening right now, and this moment is the only one where you can experience peace, make changes, or take action. The more time you spend fully present, the more peace becomes your default state rather than an occasional experience. Developing a larger perspective on your life also contributes to unshakable peace. When you can see your current challenges in the context of your entire life journey, they become less overwhelming. When you can view your problems in the context of human history and the vastness of existence, they become more manageable. This cosmic perspective doesn't minimize real difficulties, but it helps you maintain equilibrium and hope during difficult periods. You can cultivate this perspective through practices like meditation, spending time in nature, studying philosophy or spirituality, or simply taking time to reflect on the larger patterns and purposes in your life. These practices connect you to something greater than your immediate concerns and remind you that your worth and peace don't depend on solving every problem or achieving every goal. Creating supportive practices and environments is also essential for maintaining inner peace. This might include regular meditation, prayer, or quiet reflection. It might involve spending time in peaceful, natural settings, engaging with inspiring books or teachings, or connecting with people who embody the peace you want to develop. It might mean limiting exposure to constantly stimulating media, toxic relationships, or unnecessarily stressful environments. These practices and environmental choices are not about avoiding life's challenges, but about creating a strong foundation of peace that you can draw upon when difficulties arise. When you regularly connect with your peaceful center during calm periods, it becomes easier to access during stressful times. Inner peace is ultimately about coming home to yourself. It's about discovering that everything you've been seeking outside yourself, validation, security, happiness, love, already exists within you. It's about realizing that your peace doesn't depend on getting what you want, but on wanting what you have. It's about understanding that you are already complete, already worthy, and already whole, regardless of your external circumstances or achievements. This inner peace is not a destination you reach, but a way of being you can choose in each moment. It's available to you right now, regardless of what problems you're facing or what goals you're pursuing. It's your birthright, your natural state, and your greatest gift to yourself and others. When you embody this peace, you become a source of stability and wisdom in a chaotic world. And you demonstrate what's possible when someone learns to live from their center rather than their circumstances. Chapter 11. Detached Decision-making under pressure. The quality of your decisions determines the quality of your life. Yet most people make their most important choices while under the influence of intense emotions, social pressure, or reactive thinking. They choose careers based on what will impress others, enter relationships driven by loneliness or desperation, make financial decisions motivated by fear or greed, and leave opportunities unexplored because of anxiety about failure. Emotional detachment transforms your decision-making process by creating space between the decision and the emotions surrounding it. When you can step back from the emotional charge of a situation, you gain access to clarity, wisdom, and strategic thinking that's impossible when you're caught up in reactive patterns. You can evaluate options based on their actual merits rather than how they make you feel in the moment. The biggest mistake people make is believing they need to feel good about a decision in order to make it. This emotional requirement keeps them trapped in their comfort zones, avoiding necessary changes because those changes feel uncomfortable or scary. But the best decisions often feel challenging initially because they require you to grow beyond your current limitations. Emotional detachment allows you to choose growth over comfort, long-term benefit over short-term ease. When facing important decisions under pressure, your first step is to recognize when emotions are clouding your judgment. Notice when you feel desperate for a particular outcome, when you're afraid of a specific consequence, or when you're trying to prove something to yourself or others. These emotional charges are signals that you need to step back and create space before choosing. Take time to separate the facts of the situation from your emotional interpretations of those facts. What actually happened versus what you think it means. What are the objective options available versus how you feel about those options? What information do you have versus what assumptions you're making? This separation helps you see the situation more clearly and identify decision criteria based on reality rather than reactivity. Consider the long-term consequences of each option, not just the immediate emotional payoff. The choice that feels best right now might create problems later, while the choice that feels difficult might lead to better outcomes. Ask yourself how you'll feel about each option in 1 year, 5 years, or 10 years. This temporal perspective helps you make decisions based on your actual values and goals, rather than temporary emotional states. Remove social pressure from your decision-making process by asking what you would choose if no one else would ever know about your decision. What would you do if you didn't have to explain your choice to family, friends, or colleagues? What option would you select if you weren't trying to maintain a particular image or meet others' expectations? This exercise reveals your authentic preferences beneath social conditioning. Practice worst-case scenario thinking to reduce fear-based decision-making. For each option you're considering, imagine the worst possible outcome and ask yourself if you could handle it. Often, you'll discover that even the worst-case scenarios are manageable, which reduces the emotional intensity surrounding the decision. When you're not paralyzed by fear of the worst outcome, you can evaluate options more rationally. Also consider best-case scenario thinking to ensure you're not being overly conservative. What could happen if everything goes better than expected? Are you limiting your potential by choosing safe options that offer little upside? Sometimes fear disguises itself as practical thinking, keeping you from pursuing opportunities that could significantly improve your life. Use decision criteria that align with your values rather than your emotions. Before evaluating specific options, clarify what factors are most important to you: financial security, creative fulfillment, family time, personal growth, social impact, or other priorities. Then evaluate each option against these criteria rather than against how they make you feel. This systematic approach removes much of the emotional confusion from complex decisions. When possible, make important decisions when you're in a calm, centered state, rather than when you're stressed, excited, or reactive. Sleep on major choices when time allows. Discuss options with trusted advisors who can provide perspective without agenda. Take breaks from thinking about the decision to let your unconscious mind process the information. These practices help you access your wisdom rather than your reactivity. Practice making small decisions from a detached perspective to build your skill for larger choices. When choosing what to eat, what to wear, or how to spend your free time, notice when emotions or social pressure influence your choices, and practice stepping back to consider what actually serves you best. This daily practice strengthens your ability to detach from emotional reactions when making bigger decisions. Learn to distinguish between intuition and emotional reaction. Intuition often feels quiet, clear, and aligned with your deeper knowing. Emotional reactions feel urgent, desperate, or driven by trying to avoid or obtain something. Intuition points toward growth and authenticity. Emotional reactions point toward comfort and validation. Developing this discernment helps you use your inner guidance without being hijacked by reactive patterns. Accept that no decision is perfect, and that some uncertainty is always involved. Perfectionism in decision-making is actually a form of emotional attachment that keeps you stuck in analysis paralysis. Sometimes the best choice is simply to choose something and remain flexible enough to adapt as new information becomes available. Detachment allows you to make decisions with the information you have while remaining open to course corrections. Remember that you can usually recover from a poor decision, but you can't recover time lost to indecision. Most choices are reversible or adjustable if they don't work out as planned. But the opportunity cost of not deciding, of remaining stuck in limbo while trying to guarantee the perfect outcome, often exceeds the cost of making an imperfect choice and adapting as needed. The goal is not to become an emotionless decision-making machine, but to ensure that your emotions inform your choices rather than control them. Your feelings provide valuable information about your needs, values, and preferences, but they shouldn't be the primary driver of important decisions, especially when you're under pressure or facing significant life changes. When you master detached decision-making, you gain tremendous confidence in your ability to navigate life's challenges. You stop avoiding difficult choices because you trust your ability to handle whatever consequences arise. You stop overthinking every option because you know you can adapt and adjust as circumstances change. You become the kind of person who moves forward decisively while remaining flexible and responsive to new information. Chapter 12. Maintaining warmth while staying detached. The greatest fear people have about emotional detachment is that they'll become cold, distant, or disconnected from others. They imagine that developing detachment will turn them into someone who doesn't care, doesn't feel, or doesn't engage meaningfully with life and relationships. This fear keeps many people trapped in emotional reactivity because they believe the only alternative to being overwhelmed by emotions is to shut down completely. But there's a crucial distinction between emotional detachment and emotional disconnection. Detachment is about not being controlled by emotions while still experiencing them fully. Disconnection is about shutting down emotionally to avoid feeling anything at all. Detachment allows you to love without possessiveness, care without anxiety, and engage without attachment to specific outcomes. Disconnection creates isolation, numbness, and an inability to form meaningful relationships. True emotional detachment actually increases your capacity for genuine warmth and connection because it removes the barriers that prevent authentic intimacy. When you're not desperately seeking validation, approval, or emotional regulation from others, you can show up more fully in relationships. When you're not trying to control other people's responses to maintain your own emotional stability, you can love them more freely. When you're not taking everything personally, you can be more present with their actual experience, rather than being consumed by your reactions to their experience. The key to maintaining warmth while staying detached is understanding that love and attachment are not the same thing. Love is a state of appreciation, care, and connection that flows freely without conditions. Attachment is a form of emotional dependency that seeks to control or possess the object of your affection. Love wants the best for the other person, even if it doesn't serve your immediate interests. Attachment wants the other person to behave in ways that make you feel secure, valued, or comfortable. You can love someone deeply while being detached from whether they love you back. You can care about someone's well-being while being detached from their choices. You can enjoy someone's company while being detached from whether they always want to spend time with you. This detached love is actually more genuine because it's not conditional on receiving something in return. Practice expressing care through presence rather than through emotional intensity. Many people mistake emotional reactivity for caring. They think that worrying about someone proves love, that getting upset about their problems shows concern, or that trying to fix their issues demonstrates care. But true presence, the ability to be fully with someone without trying to change them or absorb their emotional state, is often more helpful and certainly more sustainable. When someone you care about is struggling, instead of joining them in their emotional turmoil, offer them the gift of your calm presence. Listen without immediately trying to solve their problems. Acknowledge their experience without taking responsibility for their feelings. Provide support without taking over their healing process. This kind of presence requires emotional detachment because it asks you to care without carrying, to empathize without absorbing, and to help without controlling. Develop the ability to hold space for other people's emotions without making those emotions about you. When someone is angry, you don't need to defend yourself immediately or take their anger personally. When someone is sad, you don't need to cheer them up or absorb their sadness. When someone is excited, you don't need to match their energy level to prove you care. You can simply acknowledge their emotional experience and respond appropriately without losing your own center. This emotional independence actually makes you more attractive in relationships because people can sense that you're with them by choice rather than neediness. They don't have to manage your emotions in order to maintain the relationship. They don't have to be someone they're not to keep you happy. They can be authentic around you because they know you won't fall apart if they're having a difficult day, or won't leave if they don't constantly validate you. Express appreciation and affection without expecting specific responses. Tell people you love them because you want to express that truth, not because you need to hear it back. Compliment others because you genuinely appreciate something about them, not because you want compliments in return. Offer help because you want to contribute, not because you need to feel needed. This unconditional expression of care is possible when you're detached from outcomes and secure in your own emotional state. Set boundaries with love rather than anger or resentment. When you need to say no to someone, decline a request, or address problematic behavior, you can do so from a place of caring rather than reactivity. Boundaries set with detachment are firm but kind, clear but not cruel. They protect your well-being without punishing the other person for having needs or desires that you can't meet. Remember that maintaining your emotional equilibrium is actually a service to others. When you remain calm during crisis, stable during chaos, and centered during conflict, you provide an anchor point that others can use to find their own stability. Your detached presence becomes a gift that helps others access their own inner peace and wisdom. Practice unconditional positive regard, the ability to maintain respect and caring for someone regardless of their behavior. This doesn't mean accepting abuse or enabling destructive patterns. It means recognizing the inherent worth of people while addressing problematic behaviors directly. You can disapprove of someone's actions while still caring about their well-being. You can set firm boundaries while maintaining compassion for their struggles. Cultivate curiosity rather than judgment. When people behave in ways that trigger you, instead of immediately labeling their behavior as wrong or making it about yourself, get curious about what might be driving their actions. What needs are they trying to meet? What fears might be motivating them? What pain might be underneath their difficult behavior? This curious stance allows you to respond with wisdom and compassion rather than reactivity and defensiveness. The goal is to become someone who can remain warm, caring, and engaged while maintaining your emotional autonomy. You can love freely because you don't need love desperately. You can give generously because you're not keeping score. You can be vulnerable because you're not dependent on others for your sense of worth. You can invest in relationships because you enjoy them, not because you need them to feel complete. This balance between warmth and detachment makes you a more trustworthy friend, partner, colleague, and family member. People can count on you to remain stable during their difficulties, honest about your own needs and limitations, and present for genuine connection without hidden agendas or emotional manipulation. Chapter 13. Advanced Techniques for Emotional Mastery. Once you've developed basic emotional detachment skills, there are advanced techniques that can deepen your mastery and help you maintain equanimity in even the most challenging circumstances. These practices require consistent application and often involve working with subtle aspects of your psychology that aren't immediately obvious. But mastering them can provide you with unshakable inner stability and the ability to remain centered regardless of what life presents. The first advanced technique is learning to work with emotional energy rather than emotional content. Most people get caught up in the stories their emotions tell them. They analyze why they're angry, what their anxiety means, or how to interpret their sadness. But emotions are fundamentally energetic phenomena that can be worked with directly without getting involved in their narrative content. When you feel a strong emotion arising, instead of immediately trying to understand it or justify it, focus on its energetic qualities. Where do you feel it in your body? What does the sensation feel like? Heat, cold, pressure, tingling, tightness. How big is it? Is it moving or static? Is it dense or light? By relating to emotions as energy rather than stories, you can often allow them to move through your system more quickly without getting stuck in the mental drama they create. Another powerful technique is learning to breathe with your emotions rather than against them. Most people unconsciously hold their breath or breathe shallowly when experiencing difficult emotions, which actually intensifies the emotional experience and makes it last longer. Instead, practice breathing deeply and smoothly when emotions arise, sending your breath directly into the areas where you feel emotional energy. This conscious breathing doesn't try to eliminate the emotion or force it to change. It simply provides space for the emotion to exist without resistance. Often, when you stop fighting your emotional experience and start breathing with it, emotions naturally begin to shift and flow rather than staying stuck in your system. Develop the ability to zoom out from your immediate emotional experience and view it from different perspectives. When you're caught in emotional reactivity, practice shifting to what could be called the observer of the observer. First, notice that you're having an emotional experience. Then notice that you're aware of having this emotional experience. Then notice that you're aware of being aware. This progressive stepping back can create profound distance from even intense emotional states. You can also practice temporal zooming by imagining yourself 5 years in the future, looking back at your current emotional experience. How would your future self advise you to handle this situation? What would seem important from that perspective? What would seem trivial? This technique helps you access wisdom and perspective that's often unavailable when you're in the middle of emotional reactivity. Learn to work with the pre-emotional space, the moment before an emotion fully forms. With practice, you can become aware of the subtle shift in your internal state that happens just before an emotional reaction kicks in. In this pre-emotional space, you have maximum choice about how to respond. You can allow the emotion to form and express naturally, or you can consciously choose a different response altogether. This requires developing very subtle awareness of your internal states. and usually becomes possible only after you've been practicing emotional detachment for some time. But once you can catch emotions in this pre-formation stage, you gain tremendous freedom to choose your responses based on wisdom rather than conditioning. Practice emotional Aikido, the art of redirecting emotional energy rather than resisting it or being overwhelmed by it. When someone directs anger, criticism, or negativity toward you, instead of defending against it or absorbing it, practice letting it flow past you while maintaining your center. Imagine yourself as a tree in a windstorm, bending with the force while remaining rooted in your own stability. This technique works with your own difficult emotions as well. Instead of fighting against anger, anxiety, or sadness, practice moving with the emotion while maintaining your observational awareness. This Aikido approach often allows emotions to pass through your system more quickly and with less residual impact. Develop what could be called emotional proprioception, the ability to sense your emotional state with the same clarity that you can sense your physical position. Just as you know where your arm is without looking at it, you can learn to know your emotional state without having to analyze it. This subtle awareness allows you to make micro-adjustments to your emotional equilibrium throughout the day, preventing small disturbances from becoming major reactions. Learn to use your emotional reactions as information about your unconscious beliefs and conditioning. Every emotional trigger reveals something about your inner landscape that you may not be consciously aware of. Instead of just trying to manage or eliminate emotional reactions, use them as data about areas where you might still be unconsciously seeking validation, approval, or control. Ask yourself, what belief would need to be true for this emotion to make sense? If you're feeling anxious about a presentation, what belief about evaluation, performance, or your worth would create that anxiety? If you're feeling angry about someone's behavior, what expectation or rule about how people should act is being violated? This investigation can reveal hidden attachments and beliefs that you can then work with directly. Practice emotional fasting by deliberately exposing yourself to minor triggers while maintaining detachment. Just as physical fasting can increase your appreciation for food and your awareness of hunger patterns, emotional fasting can increase your resilience and your understanding of your emotional patterns. Start with small challenges and gradually work with more significant triggers as your capacity develops. Master the art of emotional timing by learning when to engage with emotions and when to detach from them. Sometimes, the most skillful response is to feel an emotion fully and let it inform your actions. Sometimes the wisest choice is to observe the emotion without being influenced by it. Developing discernment about which approach serves each situation is an advanced skill that requires experience and wisdom. The ultimate goal of these advanced techniques is not to eliminate your emotional life, but to develop such mastery over your emotional experience that you can choose how to engage with whatever arises. You become like a skilled surfer who can ride any wave with grace and skill, or like a master musician who can play any piece with technical precision while maintaining artistic expression. This level of emotional mastery provides profound freedom because you're no longer at the mercy of your conditioning, your triggers, or your circumstances. You can respond to any situation from your highest wisdom rather than your deepest wounds. You can remain centered in chaos, calm in crisis, and loving in the face of hostility. This is the promise of advanced emotional detachment. Not a life without emotions, but a life where emotions serve your highest good rather than controlling your experience. Chapter 14. Integrating detachment into daily life. The real test of emotional detachment is not how well you can practice it during meditation or quiet reflection, but how effectively you can apply it during the chaos and demands of daily life. Most people find it relatively easy to feel detached and peaceful when they're alone in a calm environment, but struggle to maintain that equilibrium when dealing with difficult people, unexpected challenges, or high-pressure situations. Integrating detachment into daily life requires developing what could be called applied wisdom, the ability to remember and implement these principles when you're stressed, triggered, or overwhelmed. This integration happens gradually as you create systems, practices, and reminders that support your commitment to emotional freedom even when life gets complicated. Start your day with intention setting rather than immediate reaction. Most people wake up and immediately check their phone, exposing themselves to other people's agendas, problems, and emotional energy before they've even fully awakened. This reactive start to the day sets you up for hours of emotional reactivity. Instead, take even 5 minutes when you wake up to center yourself. Remind yourself of your commitment to emotional detachment and set intentions for how you want to show up during the day. Create transition rituals between different parts of your day. When moving from home to work, from one meeting to another, or from work back to personal time, take a moment to consciously shift your energy and recommit to your detachment practice. This might involve taking 3 deep breaths, briefly meditating, or simply reminding yourself that you have the power to choose your responses regardless of what you encounter. Practice micro-detachments throughout the day. You don't need extended meditation sessions to apply these principles. When you feel yourself getting triggered by an email, take a breath before responding. When someone makes a comment that normally would upset you, pause and observe your reaction before choosing your response. When you catch yourself worrying about something outside your control, redirect your attention to what you can actually influence. Use everyday activities as mindfulness practice. Instead of operating on autopilot during routine tasks, use them as opportunities to practice presence and detachment. When washing dishes, focus completely on the experience without mental commentary. When walking, pay attention to your body and breath rather than getting lost in thought. When eating, taste your food fully instead of eating while distracted. These simple practices strengthen your ability to stay present and centered throughout the day. Develop standard responses to common triggers. Most people encounter similar challenging situations repeatedly, whether it's dealing with criticism at work, managing family conflicts, or handling disappointment when things don't go as planned. Instead of being caught off guard each time, prepare thoughtful responses in advance that align with your commitment to detachment. For example, when someone criticizes your work, instead of immediately defending yourself, you might say, "Thank you for the feedback. Let me consider what you've said." When someone tries to engage you in gossip or complaining, you might respond, "I can see you're frustrated. What do you think might help?" When facing disappointment, you might remind yourself, "This is information, not a judgment about my worth." Set boundaries around your emotional energy, just as you would set boundaries around your time or money. This means being selective about which emotional dramas you engage with, limiting exposure to unnecessarily negative media or people, and protecting time for practices that support your emotional well-being. You have finite emotional resources, and learning to invest them wisely is crucial for maintaining detachment. Practice emotional budgeting by allocating your emotional energy intentionally, rather than letting it be drained by whatever demands your attention. Decide in advance which situations deserve your full emotional investment and which ones you'll handle with detached professionalism. This conscious allocation helps prevent emotional exhaustion and ensures you have energy available for what truly matters. Create environmental supports for your detachment practice. This might mean keeping books or quotes visible that remind you of these principles, setting phone reminders to check in with your emotional state, or surrounding yourself with objects that help you remember your commitment to inner peace. Your environment should support your highest intentions rather than undermining them. Develop accountability systems that help you maintain your practice when motivation wanes. This could involve working with a mentor or coach who understands these principles, joining a group of people committed to emotional growth, or simply checking in with yourself regularly about how well you're applying what you've learned. Without accountability, it's easy to slip back into old reactive patterns when life gets stressful. Learn to use challenges as practice opportunities rather than seeing them as problems to avoid. Every difficult situation is a chance to apply your detachment skills in real-world conditions. Instead of dreading conflicts, criticism, or setbacks, start viewing them as training exercises that help you build emotional resilience and mastery. Practice stealth detachment by applying these principles without announcing them to others. You don't need to explain to everyone that you're practicing emotional detachment. Simply embody the principles quietly and let your increased calm, clarity, and wisdom speak for themselves. This prevents you from getting caught up in defending or explaining your approach and allows you to focus on consistent application. Remember that integration is a gradual process that requires patience with yourself. You won't immediately apply these principles perfectly in every situation. There will be times when you react automatically, get caught up in emotional drama, or forget everything you've learned. This is normal and expected. The goal is not perfection, but consistent improvement over time. Track your progress by noticing how you handle similar situations differently over time. You might not notice day-to-day improvements, but if you compare how you respond to criticism now versus 6 months ago, or how you handle stress now versus a year ago, you'll likely see significant growth. This recognition helps maintain motivation and confirms that your practice is creating real change. The key to successful integration is making detachment a way of life rather than just a technique you use occasionally. When emotional freedom becomes your default mode of operation rather than something you have to remember to practice, you've successfully integrated these principles into your daily existence. At that point, detachment becomes as natural as breathing, supporting you automatically through whatever life presents. Chapter 15. Your new life of emotional freedom. You now possess the knowledge and tools to live a completely different kind of life than most people experience. You understand how to observe your emotions without being controlled by them, how to detach from outcomes without losing motivation, how to maintain your center regardless of external circumstances, and how to respond to challenges from wisdom rather than reactivity. This is not theoretical knowledge. This is practical power that can transform every aspect of your existence. But knowledge alone is not enough. The information you've learned becomes transformation only when you consistently apply it in your actual life circumstances. The difference between people who remain trapped in emotional reactivity and those who achieve genuine freedom is not in what they know, but in what they practice. Your new life begins the moment you commit to implementing these principles regardless of how you feel about doing so. The first thing you'll notice as you develop emotional detachment is how much energy you've been wasting on things outside your control. All the hours spent worrying about outcomes you can't influence, all the mental energy consumed by other people's opinions, all the emotional resources drained by taking things personally, this energy becomes available for creative and productive purposes. You'll feel like you've gained extra hours in your day because you're no longer spending time being upset about things that don't actually require your emotional involvement. Your relationships will transform in ways you might not expect. Some people will be drawn to your new sense of calm and centeredness. They'll appreciate your ability to remain stable during their difficulties and your capacity to love without neediness or control. These relationships will deepen because they're based on genuine connection rather than emotional dependency or manipulation. However, some relationships may become strained as you change. People who were used to controlling you through emotional drama may resist your new boundaries. Those who relied on you to absorb their emotional chaos may be uncomfortable with your refusal to carry their burdens. Some may accuse you of being cold or uncaring when you stop reacting to their triggers or refuse to join them in worry and complaint. This relationship sorting is actually healthy, even when it's painful. As you develop emotional detachment, you naturally attract and maintain relationships with people who appreciate authenticity, growth, and emotional maturity. You release relationships that were based on drama, codependence, or mutual reactivity. The connections you keep become more genuine and satisfying because they're built on respect and appreciation rather than need and manipulation. Your decision-making will become dramatically more effective because you'll choose based on logic, values, and long-term benefit rather than temporary emotional reactions. You'll take calculated risks that move you toward your goals instead of avoiding opportunities because they feel scary. You'll end situations that don't serve you instead of staying trapped because change feels uncomfortable. You'll pursue what you actually want instead of what you think will make others approve of you. This improved decision-making accelerates your success in every area because you're no longer sabotaging yourself through emotional reactivity. You stop making career choices based on what will impress people rather than what aligns with your strengths and interests. You stop choosing romantic partners based on desperation or fantasy rather than compatibility and shared values. You stop making financial decisions based on fear or greed rather than sound planning and appropriate risk assessment. Your health will likely improve as you eliminate the chronic stress that comes from emotional reactivity. When you're not constantly activating your fight or flight response over non-threatening situations, your nervous system can relax into its natural balanced state. You'll sleep better because you're not replaying conversations or worrying about tomorrow's challenges. You'll have more physical energy because you're not exhausting yourself with emotional drama. You'll discover that you can maintain your values and principles even when they're unpopular or challenged. Because your emotional well-being doesn't depend on others' approval, you can do what you believe is right, regardless of criticism or social pressure. This integrity becomes a source of deep self-respect and attracts people who share your commitment to authenticity and truth. Your work performance will improve as you become less affected by workplace politics, criticism, and pressure. You'll make better professional decisions because you're not trying to prove anything or defend against perceived threats. You'll communicate more effectively because you're responding from clarity rather than defensiveness. You'll handle criticism and feedback constructively because your self-worth isn't threatened by suggestions for improvement. You'll find that you can be genuinely helpful to others in ways that weren't possible when you were emotionally reactive. People will seek your counsel because they sense your stability and wisdom. You'll be able to offer support without getting pulled into drama, provide perspective without being preachy, and maintain compassion without enabling destructive behavior. Perhaps, most importantly, you'll discover an inner peace and contentment that doesn't depend on external circumstances. You'll stop waiting for life to be perfect before you allow yourself to be happy. You'll appreciate what you have while working toward what you want. You'll find joy in simple experiences because you're not constantly focused on what's missing or wrong. This inner peace is not passive resignation or emotional numbness. It's an active state of engagement that comes from knowing you can handle whatever life presents. You'll feel more alive, not less, because you're no longer dulled by constant emotional reactivity. You'll be more present in each moment because you're not lost in mental stories about the past or future. The transformation you experience will inspire others, even if you never speak directly about these principles. Your example of calm, strength, and centered wisdom will give others permission to develop their own emotional freedom. You'll become living proof that it's possible to care deeply while remaining detached, to love fully while maintaining independence, and to engage completely while staying centered. This is not the end of your journey, but the beginning of a new way of living that will continue to deepen and expand throughout your life. The skills you've learned will become more natural with practice, and you'll discover even subtler applications as you encounter new challenges and opportunities. Every situation becomes a chance to practice emotional mastery, and every relationship becomes an opportunity to embody the wisdom you've developed. Your new life of emotional freedom is not a destination you arrive at, but a way of being you choose moment by moment. Each time you observe your emotions without being controlled by them, each time you respond from wisdom rather than reactivity, each time you maintain your center during chaos, you're creating this new life. The power has always been yours. Now you know how to use it. The world needs people who embody this emotional mastery. In a society increasingly driven by reactivity, drama, and emotional manipulation, your example of centered wisdom becomes a gift to everyone you encounter. You become a source of stability in chaos, clarity in confusion, and peace in conflict. This is not just personal transformation. This is a contribution to the collective healing our world desperately needs. Your journey of emotional detachment without becoming cold is complete when you realize it never ends. It's a continuous practice of choosing freedom over reactivity, wisdom over emotion, and love over attachment. Every day offers new opportunities to deepen this mastery, and every relationship provides new chances to practice these principles. The life of emotional freedom you've learned to create is yours to live fully, starting right now.